Part 3. The Apocalypse. He seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil, or Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. Revelations 22. Chapter 19. The Weaving of Shadows. The cobblestones of Oak Hill glistened under the sickly white moon, slick with a rain that tasted of ash. A perpetual unease clung to the air, thicker tonight than ever before. A viscous film that coated the throat and tightened the chest. He seeped into the marrow, a cold premonition whispered on the wind that snaked through the crooked alleys, through the skeletal branches of blighted elms. The laughter of children, once a common sound, had long since been silenced, replaced by the frantic scratching of rats in the walls, and the mournful creak of ill-maintained gallows swaying empty against the bruised sky. Oak Hill was dying, not from plague or famine, but from an insidious, suffocating fear. And the architect of that fear was Vargoth, a name whispered in the hushed, terrified tones that still dared to flicker in the deepest shadows. He moved with an unsettling grace, a sleek, dark-blue predator sculpted from nightmare. His form, a blasphemous hybrid of something reptilian and something darkly human, flowed over the glistening stones without a sound. His scales, a midnight sapphire, seemed to absorb the meager moonlight, rendering him a shifting void. His reptilian eyes, pale and cold as glacial ice, scanned the alleyways, missing nothing. The glint of malevolent intelligence burned within them, a hunger that went far beyond mere sustenance. Vargoth enjoyed the hunt. He reveled in the terror he inspired, a connoisseur of dread. He craved the unraveling of human sanity, the delicate snap of a mind pushed beyond its limits. The scent of fear, thick and intoxicating, clung to the air, a pheromonal banquet that guided him. He could practically taste the desperation, a metallic tang on his forked tongue. He followed the potent miasma of panic to a small, dilapidated house on the edge of the neighborhood. Its windows were crudely boarded up, a pathetic, desperate attempt at defense against the inevitable. The very timber of the house seemed to weep, groaning under the weight of its own decay and the terror it harbored. 2 young Krill women, sisters, lived there. Elara, barely 17, with hair the color of spun moonlight, a stark contrast to the grime that permeated Oak Hill. Samantha, her younger sister, no older than 13, her eyes wide with the haunted innocence of a lamb before the slaughter. They were hiding, huddled together in the damp earthen cellar, beneath a floor that sagged and groaned with every gust of wind. Their breaths were shallow, held captive in their chests, the silence punctuated only by the frantic, echoing thumping of their hearts. They had heard the stories, of course. Everyone in Oak Hill had. Tales of a creature lurking in the shadows, a monster of terrifying intelligence and insatiable cruelty. Stories of disappearances, of bodies found grotesquely mutilated, their internal organs rearranged into blasphemous symbols, and whispers of unspeakable acts so depraved they curdled the blood in the telling. Elara had tried to shield Samantha from the worst of it, to maintain a semblance of normalcy, to pretend the monster was just a story, but the fear had seeped in, poisoning everything. It stained their food, tainted their dreams, and clutched at their throats whenever a shadow stretched too long, whenever the wind howled too eerily. A creak above them, the sound of splintering wood, not from age, but from deliberate force. Elara squeezed Samantha's hand, her knuckles white, her nails digging into the younger girl's flesh. "It's just the house settling," she whispered, her voice a reedy tremor, a lie barely formed. Samantha's small hand trembled in hers, and Elara knew that her sister didn't believe it either. The house wasn't settling. It was being violated. Vargoth was patient. He enjoyed the prelude, the slow, agonizing build-up of terror. He savored the moment when hope finally sputtered and died, leaving only the raw, primal instinct to survive. He moved slowly, deliberately, each subtle scraping of his powerful claws on the wood floor a symphony of dread, a metronome counting down their last moments of peace. The boards above them groaned, then ripped, the sound impossibly loud in the deathly quiet. A sliver of moonlight, sickly and pale, pierced through the new tear in the floorboards. He reached the top of the cellar steps. He paused there, a silhouette of horror, letting the sisters' fear saturate the air, letting it ripen, grow potent. He could feel it, taste it, almost physically inhale it. It sustained him in a way food never could. Then, with a predatory grace that defied his hulking form, he began his descent. The single candle in the cellar, a stubby half-melted wick, flickered, casting grotesque shadows that danced on the damp earthen walls. Alara gasped, a choke sound, pulling Samantha closer until their bodies were pressed together, two small, fragile birds attempting to become one. Vargoth emerged from the darkness, a nightmare made flesh. His scales glimmered with an unholy sheen, his powerful limbs coiled and uncoiled with silent menace. His eyes, burning with a cold glacial fire, locked onto theirs. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His very presence was a physical entity, a crushing weight that descended upon them, enough to crush their spirits, to steal the very air from their lungs. He moved with a fluid, almost hypnotic grace, circling them slowly, like a predator closing in on its prey. His head tilted, a gesture that was both mocking and terrifying in its silent implication. He lowered his head, sniffing the air directly in front of them, his nostrils flaring, drawing in the scent of their terror, making them hyper-aware of their own panicked breaths. Alara found her voice, a desperate, trembling plea that emerged as a ragged whisper. "Please, please leave us alone. We haven't done anything." Her voice cracked, betraying the fragile composure she tried to maintain for Samantha. Vargoth's reptilian features contorted into what could only be described as a mirthless smile, a stretching of his powerful jaw that revealed rows of needle-sharp teeth. It was a silent, terrifying acknowledgment of her plea, and a cruel, wordless dismissal. He raised a clawed hand, each talon like a polished obsidian dagger, and slowly, deliberately, traced a line down Alara's cheek, his cold, rough scales brushing against her skin, leaving a chill in their wake, a phantom scar. He didn't kill them quickly. He never did. He preferred to play with his victims, to unravel their minds, to strip them bare of everything that made them human. He used their fears, their hopes, their dreams, and twisted them into weapons against themselves. Without uttering a sound, Vargoth began his horrific work. His eye, that pale glacial orb, was his primary tool. He would fix one sister with an unblinking stare, then the other, his gaze of physical force, probing, dissecting. He would move a single claw, slowly, deliberately, towards Samantha, then pause, allowing Alara's heart to seize in her chest, before shifting his attention back to her, an unspoken question in his eyes. Which one will break first? Which one will I take? He began to move around them, his long tail sweeping the damp floor, rattling forgotten detritus in the corners of the cellar. He would stop abruptly, his head cocked, as if listening to something they couldn't hear. Then, his eyes would lock with Alara's, and she would feel it, the sudden vivid image in her mind of Samantha alone, screaming, her small body mangled, left behind. He was showing her, without a word, the horrors he had wrought elsewhere, the unspeakable acts, and the dark, inevitable fate that awaited them. He was forcing her to confront the ultimate responsibility of protection, and the crushing weight of its inevitable failure. He picked up a small, forgotten wooden doll from a dusty shelf. Samantha's, Alara realized with a fresh pang of terror. Vargoth turned it over in his claws, his eye fixed on Alara. With a slow, fluid motion, he began to dismember it. First, an arm, snapped with a soft, sickening crack. Then a leg, torn from its socket. He didn't make eye contact with Samantha, but Alara saw her sister's small body begin to tremble uncontrollably, tears silently streaming down her face as she watched her childhood toy, a symbol of innocence, being systematically annihilated. Vargoth then dropped the mangled doll parts onto the floor between them, a silent, bloody prophecy. He shifted his weight, and the very air around him seemed to thicken, pressing down on them. His gaze bore into Ilara, conveying a profound, horrifying understanding of the darkness that lurked within everyone, the primal urges that society tried to suppress. He didn't need to speak of power, of control, of the exquisite pleasure of inflicting pain. His very presence, his silent actions, radiated these concepts. He stood before them, a living embodiment of untamed predatory will. He would lean in close, his cold breath ghosting over their faces, the scent of fresh blood and something ancient, reptilian, fouling the air. He would make a soft clicking sound with his jaw, a sound that seemed to vibrate in their very bones, and then his eyes would dart to a dark corner of the cellar, then back to them, as if inviting them to imagine what lurked there, what he could do to them in that impenetrable blackness. Their minds, already reeling from fear, began to conjure their own horrors, painting vivid, gruesome pictures based on his silent suggestions. He preyed on their insecurities, their vulnerabilities, their desperate love for each other. He would place a clawed finger between them, pressing down, as if to physically divide them, to force a choice, to highlight the impossible decision he was forcing upon Ilara, which one to save, if a choice were even possible. He moved with a devastating slowness, each gesture a carefully crafted torment. His silence was not just the absence of sound, it was a void, a deafening roar of impending doom that resonated in their souls. He forced them to confront their deepest fears, without a single word. He would trace patterns in the dust, patterns that seemed to mimic the symbols of mutilation whispered about in the alleys, sending shivers of revulsion through them. He would gesture towards the boarded-up windows, then towards the gallows outside, a silent promise of public degradation and death if they tried to escape, if they even thought of resisting. He used their love for each other as his sharpest blade, cleaving through their defenses, forcing them to imagine the other's suffering, amplifying their own. Hours passed. The flickering candle burned low, casting longer and more distorted shadows, twisting the familiar cellar into a hellish tableau. The air grew thick, not just with despair, but with the cloying metallic tang of raw, unadulterated terror. The sisters were becoming husks of their former selves, their eyes vacant, glazed over with shock and a profound, unbearable sorrow. Their spirits, once fiercely entwined, were now frayed, tattered things, their resolve systematically dismantled. Samantha, curled into a fetal position, whimpered softly, a broken melody. Ilara, her body stiff with a horror too vast to process, stared blankly ahead, her mind lost in a labyrinth of Vargoth's weaving, a nightmare from which she could never awaken. Finally, as the first anemic rays of dawn began to creep through the cracks in the boarded-up windows, painting the cellar in sickly gray light, Vargoth was satisfied. His reptilian features still stretched in that silent, terrifying smile, softened almost imperceptibly with a chilling sense of accomplishment. He had woven his nightmare. He had reshaped their reality. He had claimed their souls, not with a quick kill, but with a slow, agonizing theft of everything they were and ever could be. He turned, his movements as fluid and silent as when he arrived. He ascended the cellar steps, leaving behind a scene of unspeakable horror. The silence that followed his departure was deeper, more desolate than before. It was broken only by the soft, ragged whimpering of Samantha, a broken echo of the girl she once was, her small body shuddering with silent, unending sobs. Ilara lay beside her, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling, unseeing, her mind lost, shattered into a million pieces by the labyrinth of terror Vargoth had crafted for her. She made no sound, no movement, simply existed as a vessel for the immense crushing emptiness he had left behind. Oak Hill was a little darker that morning. The shadows clung a little deeper. The fear was a little more pervasive, a toxic haze that permeated every stone, every breath. Vargoth had claimed another victory, another piece of the neighborhood's soul, twisting it into something monstrous, something broken beyond repair. And as he disappeared into the morning mist, a phantom of dread dissolving with the dawn, he knew that his work was far from over. The weaving of nightmares had only just begun.